Okay, so we are live, and we are a few minutes late, actually, but we are live. So I know people are going to be joining in. It's a very interesting discussion, and I know a lot of people wanted to chime in. So I know people will be chiming in, but we got a lot to talk about. It's going to be recorded, and so people can always watch the replay. But my name is Attorney Justin Camper, and this is Small Business Saturday podcast. But today we're not really talking about business. We're talking about the law, and we're talking about guns, or you can say we're talking about the business of guns and the law, right? And so I got some distinguished guests today. We have our repeat host, Shanon Buari, attorney Shanon Buari. He only works with $1 million clients, but he's definitely someone you want to get to know. We have Professor Israel. He always comes with the facts and statistics. And then we have, I don't know if I should say Professor Cliff Mason. He's also an instructor, but also someone I went to law school with, very well versed in the law. So I'm gonna let you guys, because I do want people to reach out to you after this is over with. So I'm gonna let you guys just give like a 1 minute spiel of like who you are and where people can find you. So we'll start with you, Cliff.
Yeah, hi everybody. Cliff Mason II. I'm the Dean of Academics at a private high school here in Los Angeles. So I'm 2 hours later than everybody else. You can reach me if you want to. I write oftentimes at masonreport.com, and I've done pods with another one of our former classmates, Sean DeSheffy, and Cliff H at masonreport.com. But you can find me on most social media. But anything politics, social justice, policy related, I am interested and willing to engage.
Great. Yeah, I forgot to ask. So, really quick, what are your, I know you probably have a lot of views and opinions about it, but what are your quick view of guns, and are you a gun owner?
So guns are kind of an inevitable reality for where we are as a country. The idea that you're going to ban guns is kind of really a notion that's not conceivable in our country, or I mean, it's not sensible to assume that we could eliminate something that has been such a large part of the culture for kind of a couple centuries. So I am a gun owner, to be sure. I am a gun owner, but I also support common sense gun regulations. The problem is a lot of the laws on the books are not sensible, and a lot of the laws that are that are not on the books that are sensible are, unfortunately, for political reasons, not able to get passed.
Okay. Thanks for that. And you are a gun owner, right?
I am.
Okay. All right. So we'll go with you, Shanon. Just real quick, who you are and your personal views on guns, and if you're a gun owner.
Thanks. Shanon Buari. I practice law here in the state of Indiana. Basically everything except criminal defense, employment matters, and then domestics with children. Justin was erroneous in his comment a little earlier. I don't represent multi-million-dollar clients only. I also represent the little guy. I'm actually more prone to represent the little guy than I am the multi-million-dollar client. I made a comment to Justin yesterday about beating up on smaller attorneys, and I think that's where he kind of took that and went left. But I am a gun owner. I own everything from 9mm to 308 blackouts to AR-15s to over-unders. I hunt, so I have a vast array of firearms, and I think I agree with what Cliff Mason said a bit earlier, but I'm sure that there'll be a caveat at some point as to what it is that he says that the laws that he thinks need to be enacted but have yet to be enacted are. But I, for the most part, I do agree with what he said.
Okay. All right, so we all agree so far, so this should be real easy. We'll see about that. But go ahead, Professor Israel.
Hey, it is an honor to be here, and Attorney Justin Kemper, I thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I was adjusting my computer, and Brother Shannon was in the middle of the history of his name. It was so powerful. I made a mistake and kicked my computer, and I had to log back in. But you know what? Your name is so powerful and the history behind it. And I enjoy talking to Mr. Mason. So I can't sum up my opinion about guns in 1 minute, but one thing I can say is that I think that hypocrisy and deception are all behind the guns and gun policy. And I'm gonna try to share a lot of the information with you. And as far as if I own a gun or not, my personal opinion is that we have the right to bear arms, and it's nobody's business if I own a gun or not. Come into my home, and you'll be able to see. And former military.
Okay. All right. So sounds good. Sounds good. So okay. So let's talk a little bit. So we got a lot of stuff going on in the news right now. We have a New York gun law that was overturned by the Supreme Court. We have a pastor who was robbed on Livestream while his church was going on. And now he's talking about he wants to carry a gun to church. We all know about what happened at Uvalve with the school shooting. And we have two teachers here, so I'm really interested in you guys' perspective on that. And we have a mall shooting. And there was a gun owner there who shot the shooter. But people disagree with his actions. So I really want to get, you guys' thoughts on that. So we'll start with, let's start with Uvalve, because I think that's something that is still in the hearts and minds of people. What should have been done and what can we do moving forward? And we'll start with Cliff, if you don't mind.
A number of things should have been done. You can start from the failures of kind of the apparatus of communication with law enforcement to them not adhering to their training and entering when they should have, all the way to the ability for this young man to purchase the type of weapons that he had. I believe he was old enough, so that wasn't an issue. But that kind of, to me, I have a solution that would not be supported by many gun owners. If the response to many of these mass shootings is always going to be as an excuse that there was some type of mental health concern, then there should be a mental health battery assessment required before you can purchase a gun. Otherwise, that excuse really holds no weight. And so I think if that was an additional requirement, I know kind of Shannon, that's probably where we're going to definitely part ways. I think if that additional requirement, that eliminates this notion of kind of mental health being a concern, because there are guns all over the world, but for some reason, these types of massacres occur at such really kind of an incomprehensible consistency and frequency in this country, where it's not really, there's not another place that we can compare it to. And it's because of kind of these built-in excuses. And obviously, I'm sure we'll get to a discussion of the influence of the gun lobby on legislators. But outside of the influence of the gun lobby, I think another kind of a piece of legislation that would be vital would be a requirement that gun owners pass a mental health assessment from a licensed therapist.
Are you saying that the current gun owners have to go through that, or are you saying that people who
Absolutely
want to now? Okay, so everybody.
Absolutely, both. Yes, and I'm a gun owner. I own a shotgun, multiple rifles, multiple handguns. But does that mean I think I'm exempt? Absolutely not. I think if you're a gun owner, that comes with a responsibility. I am in possession of weapons of mass destruction, and not acknowledging that, to me, is doing a disservice to my community.
Okay, and have you thought about like implementation, or you just had kind of just thought about the idea? Like, how could this actually happen? Like, I mean, do we even have enough therapists to handle, all of the gun owners in America? But are you just saying, in theory, this is what needs to happen? Or are you saying there is an implementation plan, like this can happen within next year, potentially, if we were to actually push something like this?
I think obviously with any type of legislation where you're going to be growing, because that essentially this would come down kind of along conservative versus kind of neoconservative and liberal views. It's like the size of government, because if you're going to impanel these therapists to work essentially on behalf of the government, that's going to require additional funding and resources. And so, are you going to tax your way to fund it? Are you going to, like, what is going to be the mechanism to generate the revenue to fund this thing? That I don't know. I've not thought about, but I guess the response could be, do we have enough funding to continue to pay for these funerals? Do we have enough funding to continue to rebuild these schools that have been shot up? So it's like, if we can afford that, why can't we afford to pay therapists?
Okay, good point. We'll go to the next teacher, Professor Israel. So what are your thoughts on the Uvalve shooting? What should have been done? What could we do moving forward? And if you want to respond to Cliff's and his comments.
Yeah, you know what? Cliff said a mouthful, and I just took a bunch of notes. There's a couple of things I disagree with, but I have a master's in psychology and a couple of college institutions here in Illinois. I always look at as a psychology professor, always look at the psychological reasons behind things. Here's a fact that all of the school shooters, when they interview them, they say they look for soft targets, which means children, churches, places where there's not a lot of security, because the school shooters and most of these people that do this type of stuff are cowards, and they don't want people shooting back at them. They want the maximum amount of casualties as they can possibly get. Now, one of the things that Cliff said so brilliantly, but I disagree, is legislation or restrictions when it comes to guns. And this is why. I'll make it real quick. In the history of America, America hasn't been fair with the labels. America hasn't been fair with the diagnosis of who can have guns and who should not have guns. So when you look at the history of America, if Brother Cliff is competent, Brother Shanon is competent, but what if I say I don't like anybody that wear glasses, so Justin is not competent enough to have a gun because his vision is a little bit different from ours? America is not good with labels, and restrictions should not be put on people when it comes to guns. And there's a question I have for the attorneys, and I'm just going to throw that out there, is that I believe that the Second Amendment and having an attorney to defend gun laws is a contradiction, but you guys can deal with that later.
Okay.
Can I respond real quickly?
Sure.
I just very, very quick. I know Shannon wants to jump in here. I'm sorry. I think a great comparison in response is thinking about how cars are regulated, because I imagine everyone in this room is in a car a number of times in a week. And the reason that cars are so highly regulated is because they are so dangerous. If they were unregulated, there would be even more car deaths. And so these are giant steel weapons at our disposal that we are legally able to operate. And if we didn't regulate them, it would be chaos on the streets, and we don't want that. And so the idea that we can't treat these tools that were created for the sole purpose of destroying bodies, the idea that we can't regulate them the same way we can regulate cars, to me, it's not for, there's an incongruence there. Like, if we regulate one because we recognize how dangerous it is, why would we not go to the same lengths to regulate the other, recognizing how dangerous they are?
Okay. Now, I know some classic responses to that is that, driving is a privilege, but the right to bear arms is a constitutional right. So it's your right. And so I know that's one of the classic responses to that.
Yeah, but we learned in school, like we have a constitutional right of travel. I have a right to be able to transport myself to support my family. I have to be able to travel to get there. And if the car is my means of doing so, I have that same protected right. But also, we can get into the Second Amendment later. I'm not sure if the interpretation of it has ever been consistent or accurate. We don't know what they were saying in that document.
Right, right. And I know that's debated as well. But as you know, we have to go off case law, right? So we have to essentially go off what the courts have interpreted that to mean, and that has mean so far. It has mean that you have a right to bear arms. You have a right to carry. Under certain, they can restrict it under certain circumstances, like if you're a felon or, different things, but you have that right. So I'm gonna give it to Shannon, and I want to. I know you got a lot of responses, but I want to actually coke in the New York gun law thing, and I'm going to really simplify it because we have a really short time. But so New York had a gun law, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. They had a gun law where you had to show a legal reason for having a gun. So you had to show that there was some type of threat or you're using it for self-defense. And the Supreme Court said that that was unconstitutional, that someone has the right to bear arms, period, point blank. So I want to give it to you. I know you have a lot of responses to what was said, Shannon, but also if you want to comment on the New York law, you can at this moment too.
Thank you. So, Cliff, I think from our conversations when we used to speak in the atrium to now, you've grown a bit. Because actually, I don't disagree with the mental. I don't disagree with that piece. Again, with an asterisk, I don't think if something was if a law was implemented today, right, that said a mental background check needs to happen in order for you to have guns, I don't think you can retroactively apply it. Right. I think it has to be applied moving forward. So what does that mean? If Shannon never buys another gun, I don't think Shannon is subject to that law. Right. I think, but the day Shannon goes to subject, the day Shannon subjects himself to that law when he purchases a new gun under that law's purview and is deemed mentally incompetent, I then think you might be able to say, well, he has purchased guns in the past. Should that raise issues? Should that raise red flags, etc. Right. But I don't think you can say if Shannon never buys another gun, we still need to test him for his competency for guns he purchased prior to this law being enacted. So I think that's the only space we probably differ there. And then again, from the conversations in the atrium, that's a long way. So I commend you there. My issue is with having to spell out the reason for owning a gun like you needed to in New York is that it becomes subjective, right? So now you're putting the call it ownership power to determine whether or not you should be able to protect yourself in the hands of somebody else, right? So in the event, going back to what Professor Israel kind of alluded to, I'm gonna use your glasses theory, but not in the same context. In the event, I personally am making decisions for the day, whether it be a panel, whether it be one person, whether it be the county sheriff, however you want to do it, decides that individuals with glasses do not need the right to own guns, or you've been robbed, call it once, it was a one-off instance, it's never going to happen again, you don't walk that part of the street, then I say no. To me, that's too subjective. And I think that infringes on your constitutional right. Whatever the Second Amendment says, it says what it says, right? But I think at that point, I'm starting to infringe. Now, if there are barriers, i.e., you having felonies, domestic violence, convictions, crimes of moral turpitude, then I think I could say, well, wait a minute, this is not a subjective, this is objective. I can point to the fact that, Shannon has DVs on his record. I can point to the fact that Shannon has armed robberies. And so these are reasons we're denying. But I think the court was correct in overturning New York's gun laws because, again, but for crimes of moral turpitude or something of that nature, I think it becomes way too subjective, right? I mean, it becomes, unless, and I'm not privy to it, I don't know, unless they had some sort of test, some sort of system in place that was objective to then say, you know what, this is why this person was denied versus this person. I think you run into a situation or scenario where it becomes completely subjective. And I think at that point, you're then infringing on an individual's rights.
Yeah, and I want to give it to Cliff next, but I wanted to respond a little bit to that, and I wanted to, and I want Cliff to give me his thoughts. So, I think that mental health sounds great, and a lot of ideas sound great on paper, right? But as 4 Black men know, that a lot of times laws that sound good on paper are misapplied misappropriately to Black men and to Black people in general. And so, and I'll give a very quick example. So, I have a cousin that's trying to buy a house, trying to sell her house. And she can't sell it because the city keeps making up rules as to like, there's something wrong with your house. They keep failing inspections, right? And so you would think, inspections are great. You want to sell your house and you want to have an inspection, you should require people to have an inspection. That sounds great. But then because the people don't like her, or because they want to have her keep paying fees, or maybe because she's Black, I don't know. I don't want to assume, but maybe because she's Black and she's in a white community, they're holding her back, right? And so I think, how do you get around the fact that this could be, applied misappropriately to Black people? And then how do you get around the fact of what Shannon is saying? And I don't know your views on the New York law, but about, again, how this could be misapplied, where you're allowing certain people to have guns, but not, shouldn't it be a constitutional right, period, point blank? As long as you meet the qualifications, you have a right to own a gun.
Yeah, I know that in this country, the influence of bias and the pervasive nature of giving folks the opportunity to choose who is and who is not eligible to participate in certain liberties is always going to be misapplied. Similar to interactions oftentimes with law enforcement, we know that those aren't always equal, and I mean, not forget equitable, but those aren't close to kind of equal experiences. And so, sure, I think if my plan or a version of it was implemented, would it be misapplied in many cases? I won't say most, but in many, not some, many. In many cases, yes. But do I still think that it's going to have a more beneficial outcome? Yes. So I think if it produces a net positive outcome, I think it's still worthwhile. I'm not of the mind that we should avoid positive legislation because of the minor people who are going to, not minor in terms of age, but the people who are going to be impacted. I've never believed that. The idea, I'm not going to go off into another political tangent, but the idea that we would avoid passing certain legislation because of the few folks who would have an adverse outcome as a result, I never thought that was good policy. And so, and also Shannon, hearing your response, I love this conversation because it did make me kind of rethink my initial perspective. I do think you're right. If you're a current gun owner and you have no intention to re-entering the marketplace, it may not make sense to require that person, because you could be older and just have a collection, or just intend to pass it on. Whatever the reason, it may not make sense. And so kind of rethinking that, hearing your response, that may be a little extra judicious and put some people in, it would actually impose a burden that some folks might not be able really to have the opportunity. So yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. To answer your question, Justin, yeah, I don't know how you can avoid it other than to say it's going to happen. We know, though, historically, what's the reason that we got to some more restrictive gun laws in my home state? The Black Panthers started walking around with guns.
Right.
They saw some who they perceived to be Black militants. I don't consider the Black members of the Black Panther Party militants. I think that they were American heroes and I think they should be revered the same way we revere other American revolutionaries.
Right.
We saw more restrictive gun laws passed in California as a result of Huey Newton and folks walking around exercising their constitutionally protected right. And so, yeah, it can be done. We've done it before out of fear of melanated people walking around armed.
What about the New York law? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm a fan of the 10th Amendment, and I think states understand oftentimes what's going to be in their best interest. A gun law in Alabama or in Mississippi or in a place that has a lot of woods separating, I guess, Long Island from upstate, but like there are some areas where owning certain firearms might make more sense than in Times Square. If I live in Brooklyn, I might not need an over-under, right? Whereas if I lived in Montana, I might, because it would come in handy in certain months of the year. I have no problem with requiring folks to identify the reason that they want to own a weapon of mass destruction. I don't think that it's an infringement on liberty. To me, that's not really, there's no gray area there. I think a state has a right to impose that type of gun regulation, because I don't think that that's overburdensome to say, tell us why you want this thing. What are your intentions? What are your plans? What are your reasons for thinking that you need it? And you've identified that, and I'm fine leaving it up to kind of state officials to determine whether or not the answer for the reason that they want it is suffice.
All right.
Okay, I know I'm passing it to Professor Israel, but I'm gonna coke it with something else. I know Shannon, I saw the flames coming out, and I was trying to hold back me too. But yeah, for the sake of just moving the discussion, and you can definitely respond after Professor Israel. But Professor Israel, so you heard what Cliff is saying and about mental health, and you're in psychology. This is your field, and so I'm really interested in hearing your perspective on that. But also, he brought up New York. We talked about New York, and about how you shouldn't have to have it's okay to have a reason. Cliff is making a case that it's okay to require people to give the state a reason for having a gun, meaning not just any reason, but they have to have it for self-defense. But we just recently saw where there was a pastor who was robbed on Livestream, right? And the first thing this pastor said, I would have showed the clip, but just to save time, I'm going to just say it and paraphrase it. Anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. But he basically, when he got interviewed afterwards, he was talking about what happened. And he said, this is why I believe people need a right to carry and a right to carry within the church. But no, that's not what he said.
Not white people. No, I'm saying that's a demonstration of why he needs to carry. And I think he would show that's good cause. He's a high profile person. And so there are people who, for reasons unknown, would view him as a target. And so because of that, he does have good cause. And he would say, if they would New York would ask this person, why would you want a gun? Yeah, this is why. Watch the video. Okay, approved. And to me, that makes sense.
Right, but that's retroactively, though. I mean, when you're talking about your life on the line here, you know what I'm saying? So, that's great. They would give him a right to carry afterwards. But what about when he needs it? What about that moment? You know what I'm saying? Where
was he preaching to a congregation? He's not going to be in the pulpit armed.
Why? I mean, well, why not though? You see what I'm saying? If he was armed, maybe that situation would have came out differently. I mean, because what if those robbers would have shot him? I mean, we know historically that there have been plenty of church shootings. That's not like out the question. So like, yeah, okay, great. You give me a right to carry a gun now, but I just got robbed yesterday. What about yesterday?
Because there's too many statistics that show that even when you're armed, you're not stopping armed robbery. The idea that a good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun just looks good on a poster. It doesn't actually look good in reality because it's never happened. The majority of shootings
it happened in the mall district. I'm sorry, Professor Israel. It's your turn.
No, no,
I'm
no.
sorry.
But
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
Indiana,
I'm sorry.
It's
I'm
like
sorry.
them-
But it did just happen.
it just happened.
It did just happen in Indiana.
Yeah, but the reason we know about them is because it does happen so infrequently. Those are anomalous situations. Those are anomalies. That's not the norm.
So I think that's where we're different, right? Because I must say, and again, Professor Israel, I swear I'm gonna let you get to it after
Hey,
this.
just go
Cliff,
with it.
Cliff
Jump
might
in,
not,
jump in.
Cliff might not, but I'm gonna let you get to this. And Justin and I were talking about it yesterday. The reason I don't think you hear about them is because it doesn't fit the narrative, right? So even with the guy, so the narrative being painted right now about the person that stopped the Greenwood shooting is that he was still in the wrong. Why? Because he took 10 shots from 40 yards. That's asinine, right? Even though he had a tight grouping. So obviously he knows how to shoot. But he took 10 shots from 40 yards, right? And people on TV watch The View and, oh, he should have never been shooting from that distance. Well, he did, right? And the second part is, and I know, Justin, I might be stealing some of your thunder. There was the mall had a no carry on the premises clause, right? So you get there, no firearms allowed on the premises. So now they're saying he needs to be persecuted for breaking the law, for walking into this property that had a no guns on the premises clause, if you will, at the front door. He breached that, that clause, if you will, when he decided to bring his firearm on the premises. So again, I'm just saying it doesn't fit the narrative. I'm gonna mute my mic. I might even turn the camera off. Professor Israel is up. It's all over you.
Well, you know what? There's a couple of things. If you guys familiar with the Autobahn in Germany,
No.
No speed limit.
Right.
You can open up as fast as you can, and there's less accident. So what does that mean? Restrictions, and like Mr. Mason said, he's a fan of the 10th Amendment, and I don't trust government. I personally want less government. I believe personally that the more restrictions that you have, those who are in power can restrict certain people. So we can say, hey, if you got hair on your head, you got these laws.
You froze, Professor Israel.
Restrictions and the power to put restrictions on certain people. That's why real quick, the Second Amendment says a related militia. Mr. Mason mentioned organization, I think in the South called Not Fucking Around. That's the actual name of it.
Right.
And all of these new legislation, new policy, new ordinance came up. That means your militia is not regulated, and the color of the people in this militia are not regulated. So we're gonna exclude you. You're not part of that. And necessary to the security of a.
You're breaking up.
People aren't free. So, and then it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Technically, if you read this piece of paper in the Second Amendment, people rights would never be infringed. And without throwing a bunch of statistics at you, gun laws, gun policies, gun legislation, gun all about Caucasian people. Are Caucasian. And then the ropes that people of color have to go through that do not qualify because of background checks, the criminality of what's our community stops a lot of them from qualifying. Background checks in the hood are completely different in the South when you go to a gun show. Hey, go take one, Bernie. You can afford 200, take it. But and this is interesting too.
Yeah, Professor Israel, your internet's
okay,
freezing up. I hear you now. You're back.
Okay. Yeah, and then when you look at education, percent of Caucasian gun owners have of Caucasian gun owners that own a gun have a bachelor's degree or more. The entire issue about guns is about Caucasian people, and the reason you, as a person of color, cannot have fairness in the courts, fairness in the judicial system. Incarceration rates are overwhelmingly people of color. They did a study recently in Arizona that 5 times comparing whites versus blacks, gun convictions are in favor of Caucasian people, and 5 times more convictions of black people. And so these laws do not reflect you. The laws reflect what the Second Amendment said: free people of a free state of a regulated militia, which means if you're not part of our regulation, then everything you do, we're going to make sure that you get incarcerated for it.
So
I think sorry.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, Cliff, there's a lot of darts at you, so I'm going to let you respond.
No, I just think the idea that imposing regulations is kind of antithetical to what the framers of the Constitution intended, because it will be applied along racial lines. To me, it's just, again, I'll just go back. It's not good policy. We can't avoid making what is clearly the best decision, because we know that, again, to go to statistics, look at what the gun violence statistics were pre, what was dang it, now it just escaped me, the name of the assault weapons ban in the 90s, excuse me. Gun violence statistics pre-assault weapons ban in the 90s versus afterwards. There was a dramatic reduction, and then we allowed it to lapse, right? When we allowed it to lapse in the 2000s, we see it start to skyrocket again. I want to go back to address this idea that we should allow folks to carry guns everywhere, Wild Wild West style, because they're targeting soft targets. April 2nd, 2014, Fort Hood shooting. 3 killed, 16 others. 16 others shot. That's a military base in Texas. Could not be more secure and armed. That's not a soft target. Whole lot of people impacted by guns. September 16, 2013, Washington Navy Yard shooting. 8 killed, several others injured. November 5th, 2009, Fort Hood, again, military base targeted. 13 people killed, 32 others shot. I mean, it's not just soft targets where people are being impacted by guns.
So
quick question: the perpetrator, were they part of the military? Of those
in 2 of the instances.
Okay.
In 2 of the instances, they were.
But that's not comparing apples and oranges. I mean, that's not apples and apples, because if I am military, I know the soft targets of the military. But if a person is a shooter and goes to and looks for a soft target, if I'm military, I know what the soft targets are. So that's really not a fair comparison.
Here's the reason why it's apples to apples. Because if you're saying you're a member of the military and you've been a member of and you actually were on that base, why is it not the same as if you're a student at the school where you conduct a school shooting? It is apples to apples.
No. What I'm saying is the shooter looks for a soft target. If I know that 19 kids can't shoot me back, that's a soft target. If I am military and I know where the gun's at, where the armory is at, and I know if at this particular time I can shoot this many people and they'll be unarmed, that's because I'm military. I know what the soft targets are. And you have to, when you look at statistics, you have to really compare the data correctly. And the data shows time and time again that people who are the perpetrators look for people that cannot defend themselves.
And so I think what I was going to say, though, is that I think in your argument, Cliff, there's an assumption that the individual who undertook the task of shooting was also shooting armed individuals, right? So yes, Fort Hood is a military base, and I haven't been in the military. My mother has been. Professor Israel is military. I don't know if you carry your weapon at all times, right? So I think what he's saying is, in the event this did take place on a military base. However, it was during calling rec time when we playing basketball and nobody's armed, right? So what you don't see are people running to police stations committing these type of crimes, right? You rarely ever see these type of crimes being committed in gun stores, right? I mean, where people are armed at the time you're looking to commit these crimes. And I think that's what Professor Israel is getting at. So even though we're looking at these places being military bases, these places, so I think the assumption, just hearing the argument, I think the assumption that's being made is that these were acts of violence that took place on these places or these premises. And the presumption is the individuals that they took place against were armed as well.
Could not defend themselves.
Right. So, and I will say this, Carter used to do that trip to New Orleans. I was sitting in there, full disclosure, I was sitting there with a Caucasian guy without breaching the attorney-client privilege. And we were just having a conversation. He was looking at life. He was never getting out. They were looking at post-conviction relief, whatever. And we were just having a conversation. He would say he would literally drive to some of the most inner cities in New Orleans to commit some of his heinous crimes. And I asked why. He was like, historically, Black people don't arm themselves. Like, he literally said that. And he was like, I knew the likelihood of me doing what I did in, call it the 13th ward or the 15th ward, and facing resistance was lesser than me doing it in some of the nicer parts of Louisiana. So that's why I did it. And at that point, it dawned on me, and it was just like, well, maybe there's some validity to what he's saying, right? I think, when you throw those stats, I'm not saying that they're not true, because they all could have been armed and just couldn't. It was so fast that they couldn't think. But I think there's an assumption there, though, that the individuals who also were casualties were also armed and could have actually fought back and protected themselves in that particular instance. And that I don't know.
So I guess I have a question and I have two questions. The first question is, so then is the answer guns everywhere?
I would say yes. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. No, that's that guns everywhere. Then the second question is, then how do you account for Uvalde?
Okay.
So I think so. There's a very interesting documentary. W. Kamau Bell did he calls it the United States of whatever. He did
United Shades
of America. He did one in Texas, right? There's a particular city in Texas of maybe 60,000 people that requires every homeowner to own a firearm. Well, the statistics there have shown that the burglaries, the robberies, the B&Es, the break-ins, etc., are across the board at the lowest in the United States, right? And I know you're only talking about 60,000 people. So you can't compare that to a city like New York or Miami, DC, where you're talking about almost millions of people. You can't compare it. But what they said was, they have one maybe break-in every 10 years. And people in the city, they say, well, why do you think break-ins are? Well, we know because it's a city ordinance. It's really not a state, but it's a city ordinance that says, now it doesn't say you have to carry on your person. You just have to have a firearm in a home. Well, they attribute the lack of breaking and entering, the lack of they attribute that to that ordinance, right? And I think that the where people missed the mark about the Uvalde incident is at least as far as my understanding, there weren't people on the inside other than officers that could have prevented this from happening or stopped or stopped it.
I'm talking about the officers.
Right.
So I take issue with that, but I think that's a different issue, right? I think that's a different issue.
Right.
I think.
Well,
that's this issue. There is nobody more armed than those officers.
Right. Well, okay. So
can I respond just real quickly?
Well, we got 1 minute, so you got 30 seconds. Go ahead.
30 seconds, real quick. And the reason I said that I believe that everyone should be armed, and Shannon put it so brilliantly, when if from the mind of a criminal, I'm not robbing people that I think can shoot me back. So if everybody had the opportunity to bear arms, and then crime would be completely different. And you cannot criminalize certain people and keep the guns out of the hands of certain people, and then put the guns in the hands of other people, because 61% of all gun owners are Caucasians.
Okay,
And
so
61% of the people in jail for guns are people of color.
Okay, so I apologize, but I know we had a strict deadline timeline. So I wanted to see if we can actually follow up with this conversation, maybe in a week or 2 weeks, if you guys are all willing to do it again.
Sure.
Because I know we didn't really get a chance to really dive deep. But I appreciate you guys. I think this is a really great discussion. I think America needs this discussion. And we are all very well educated, so I think we definitely have a right to say something about the issue. So we'll follow up in a week or two, or whatever. I'll get everybody's schedules, but I definitely want to continue this. So thanks for those who did listen or maybe listening later. Again, my name is Attorney Justin Camper, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you, guys.
And just if I can, Justin, before we click out, and I know people have to go. If you haven't, please watch that episode when W. Kamau Bell goes and buys a gun and talks about, that small part of that town in Texas that there's a city ordinance that all homeowners at least must have a firearm in the house. If you haven't watched it already. And if you can, I might be able to get you a link and you can float it to everybody here.
Sure, that'd be great. All right.
Good seeing everybody.
Yep. Thank you.
Good seeing you.